This is a show about communication, about getting your message across, about connecting with people, whether you're in a two-person meeting or presenting on stage to hundreds of people. The scale of it doesn't matter, the aims are the same. I'm Maryanne Johnston, and I help clients to present their ideas with a clear and confident delivery. I also help them to prepare and create a structure for their content so it's engaging and memorable for their audience. And critically, I ensure they're using their relaxed conversational style at all times. Communication is rarely straightforward, and we may be facing many different listeners in different environments on a daily basis. And how we feel during those interactions may also vary on a daily basis. This show is all about learning the skills and techniques to enable you to be agile in the way you handle these interactions as you move around your daily life. In this season, we're discussing conflict and how to resolve it, and I'm delighted to be joined by Drew Drummond. Drew is the Managing Director of Drummond International, an award-winning Edinburgh-based leadership consultancy helping individuals and organisations to navigate change, build culture, and resolve conflict. He's a highly regarded, accredited mediator, and Drew empowers teams through storytelling and lived experiences across diverse sectors. His experience spans from the corporate sector, supporting a range of different executives and teams and leadership development, to the not-for-profit sector with Columba 1400, and the public sector, working with a number of local authorities across Scotland. First and foremost, though, he's a family man. Drew describes himself as a good dad and admits he's only considered putting his 3 beautiful children on eBay twice. Drew, thanks so much for joining me. I've been really looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Maryanne. I'm delighted to have this opportunity, and very rarely do we have conflict and communication in the same hand, but how important that is, and really looking forward to really just getting into a deeper tissue conversation than how's the weather on what we might be looking at.
Drew, in our previous conversations, we talked about what conflict is and that it's really a feeling that we experience. We also talked about different styles that we might adopt and that conflicts are different for everyone. And we also talked about how you might be able to prevent it as well, and the different types of conflict we might experience. So that might be workplace or personal relationships. Today, what I want to discuss with you is how you look after yourself as you're going through this experience. So can we talk about that, please? How, when we talk about self-care, and you touched on this during some of the earlier conversations, what should we be looking to do in terms of self-care?
Thank you, Maryanne. And I hope if you take anything from what this podcast conversation has been about, self-care, I believe, is the most important part. In conflict, you can very often lose yourself because you're so determined to make sure either you win, you're right, or the other person hears how you are experiencing, feeling, and all of the emotions as well as processes that come with that. It can get very, very confusing, can get very, very challenging. But I think there is an opportunity when you actually know what your self-care boundaries are. Now, it would be very easy for me to share with you what self-care as a mediator should do. But I feel very, very strongly that these are life skills. We need to bring the human into the room. So if you're listening, if you're either in conflict, if you're managing conflict, please, can you give me kind of the space, the time for you to think about what might be helpful for you in whatever challenge or opportunity you might be dealing with now. I'm going to spend a bit of time just sharing kind of the 3 points that I feel is important around self-care, and share some stories, personal and professional, really to give a bit of context and a bit of understanding in terms of, to Maryanne's question, what does self-care kind of look like for the human being that is in conflict? I'm going to talk about self-monitoring. I'm going to talk about having a hill road. and I'm going to talk about having a trusted other.
Great.
I start with the self-monitoring. One of the things that I find very, very helpful is that when you're in conflict, it's very easy to take it home with you, even though the door has closed and you've formally finished the session. Now, let me come back to where I was saying before. It doesn't matter whether you're party A, in conflict with party B, or whether you're the mediator. There's not a switch to how the emotions are going through you or how you are feeling. I think it's really, really important that we tend to that. From the mediator's perspective, from the person that is hosting the space for conflict to be resolved, one of the phrases I found very, very helpful in my early stages of being a mediator was to recognize that it's not your conflict. You have been invited in to try and manage this process. So if you're an HR manager, for example, if you're a chief executive and you are presented with a conflict, I found that phrase very, very helpful. It's not your conflict. And if you can look yourself in the eye and you've done your absolute best, I think we can spend a lot of time as human beings with a narrative in our head around the way things should be. The only thing that we can guarantee is change, and particularly in today's society, a little bit of uncertainty and chaos. And actually, to be able to know when enough is enough, and actually you've done your best, that is really, really important. But also for the person that is in the conflict, it's very, very easy to talk like this, but those feelings, I would encourage you to recognize them and almost write them down. So you're able to, what I would call as a phrase, which is probably a bit blunt, but to actually park it. Because a lot of us can be defined by our last dropped plate. A lot of us can be defined by the very conflict that we're going through. And what I would really want you to kind of honor is that you did have a life before this conflict presented itself. You are a human being with all your wisdom, with all your experience, that is a whole person, and it's not purely defined by how this conflict situation is going to be resolved or not. And it's being open to possibility. But if you're open to that possibility and you've contracted and committed to being part of the mediation, it's not all of you. And how important it is that you recognize where your boundaries are. You recognize actually when is enough, and I need to make sure that having written down the emotions that I'm feeling, I'm able to go and find something else that I can connect with and recognize that I have far more to bring to the world than just dealing with this conflict.
Yeah, I can see. I think that's great. I love this is not your conflict or not my conflict. But I was then thinking it can weigh you down, can't it? It can sit on your shoulders, it can be in your stomach, it can be you might be heading back home from work, being at the office, or if you're working from home, you actually don't have a journey to even park the thing on as you're going home. So I was just thinking as you were talking there, how do I love the phrase, but how do I actually do this? I love the idea of writing it down, or if there's, is there a way of almost physically being able to park this? Is it head out for a run, go for a walk, or is it I'm just wondering about what other things have you seen that your clients have done where they've been able to really step away from it, disconnect from it until the next day? So they're not lying in bed, lying awake at 3 o'clock in the morning, still thinking about it.
It's amazing, Maryanne. Pretty much most of the conflict situations I'm invited in to try and support and find a way forward for, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. Conflict is a thing that you think of when you wake up in the middle of the night and you carry with you. So I think that makes what I'm about to say even more important. And you're asking for first-hand examples. It can be, almost working from home. You will have commitments, family or otherwise, in the other room. I think it's really, really important that there is a kind of an approach or something which you choose to do for self-care and you own. Now, it might just be going to get a glass of water, but it's something that you are taking yourself out of the head space and you're getting back into your heart space. Okay. And you can feel that. And I can share with you personally that I would take my border collie Benji for a walk and I might talk to him. and I might laugh at myself. And by doing that, I'm able to let myself that there's a human in the room, and it's not just either the last fallout that we're resolving, or as I'm a mediator, just making sure we've done enough, and I need to make sure that I can go and be fully present for the dinner that I'm responsible for preparing for the family, and just making sure that the parts language is that in the whole kind of attachment when it comes to conflict, where attachment can be not, I love you, but I just don't like this part.
Yeah.
And I think actually that's very helpful in a conflict situation, and being able to navigate that and mark that forward. And that's what I mean when I talk about self-monitoring. I've also had people that are into the cold shower brigade, because sometimes you need to shock yourself to be able to get
Yeah.
out of the headspace, because it can be very overwhelming.
I love the cold shower idea. That's a shock. I'm almost looking for some kind of physical way of stepping away from whatever it is that you're experiencing. That's really interesting.
I'm gonna, for the purpose of the recording, really pick that up. But I think what I'd like to make sure that is on the table for your self-care around that self-monitoring, kind of mentally, have you been able to check out of the conflict? And also, you may need to do that physically. And I would encourage you to do both and to try both, and you find your way. But that's making sure that you put you on the table, because in conflict, self-care gets left behind. Self is often thrown under the bus. I have first-hand experience that when I'm in conflict, I want to try and resolve the situation and get people to like me. And actually, I need to be able to, in my own self, for my own kind of self-worth, need to make sure that I'm not defined by this. And actually, this is a step in the journey that is sent, for you. It's not sent to be done to you. And if you're able to walk through it, and that's where leadership comes in, either in hosting the space for the conflict to be resolved, or also presenting, actually, this is a real challenge for me. This is conflict, and I want to work through it, which may resolve and it might not resolve. But at least looking back, you've tried your best.
Brilliant.
And then now, having explored from a self-care and conflict perspective of self-monitoring, I'm now going to talk about a hill road. A number of you are probably wondering, what the heck are you talking about, Drew? Well, the hill road is somewhere you can go and just be you. Okay, the hill road comes from the writings of Ramsay MacDonald. Ramsay MacDonald was a prime minister at the beginning of the 19th century, where he was in a coalition government and a Labour government. And he had a hell of a time. It was really, really challenging. There was lots of conflict. What many people don't know is that Ramsay MacDonald was the illegitimate son of a chambermaid from Lossiemouth. And can you imagine growing up with, that context and the class society during that time? And he found it within himself to be able to take all the learning, all the opportunities that were presented to him, to then ultimately be the prime minister. And it was in his memoirs that he writes that friends are like grass, often too trodden upon. But when other friends fail, the hill road never does. Now, his hill road was getting on the sleeper from London's King's Cross up to Elgin train station on a Friday evening. And as we were pulling in on a Saturday morning, he'd put what he called his hame clays on, his hame clays, and he'd walk the Drover's Road. And that is where he found his hill road. And whatever was happening in London politically, he was able to get out of that mentally and physically. But he had his hill road, and he was able to reconnect and make sure that he had human connection of feeling listened to, of feeling valued, and a sense of belonging. This comes from a social researcher, an Australian researcher, Hugh Mackay. And I think as human beings, wherever we are, whether we're in conflict or whether we're not in conflict, in terms of having that hill road, do you have somewhere or someone that you can go and feel listened to, you can go and feel valued, and you can feel a sense of belonging? But it starts with you, and it starts with self-care.
Yeah. And your home clothes.
Well, I think that's maybe that's for those of you that are working at home, if you're in a smart suit in conflict, go and put your home clothes on. And that could be a physical kind of offering to make sure you're looking after yourself and that there's a life beyond whatever it is you might be facing.
Yeah. Wonderful. And what a wonderful journey he was able to take north from King's Cross, right?
Indeed. Indeed.
Yeah. I love those thoughts. So not it's not your conflict, making sure that you're self-monitoring, setting your boundaries, but having that, and you talked about this in one of the previous conversations about having a trusted other, having somebody else that you can talk to, because it might feel like a lonely thing to be involved in.
I would go so far to say it could be the loneliest that you feel when
Yeah.
you've got people that are throwing social hand grenades back at you and you're having to stand for what your version, what your beliefs, what your values and your attitudes are. These things can take a knocking and it can be tough. And I think it's so, so important that you know that you've got someone, even before you go into a mediation or a resolution situation, that you also make a note of who's the person you're going to call after this? Who's the person that you know loves you and will neither laugh at your dreams or mock at your failures? A regret that I carry is that when I was going through a professional conflict, challenging situation in my professional career, I went through it and it wasn't pretty. It was very, very difficult and I felt very, very alone. And I saw my first manager from a previous job and he said to me, Drew, why didn't you pick up the phone? And it was the most obvious thing. And I feel a sense of shame that I let that pass. And I tried to be a hero and manage it all by myself. And I would just want to make sure if you take anything from this episode is whatever conflict position, place you may find yourself in, please don't do it alone. It's better to connect. We need to connect as humans and don't do what I do and ignore Gordon. I unfortunately lost Gordon a number of years ago and he passed. And I never got the chance to say thank you, Gordon, for being my trusted other. I would hope that you could take my kind of experience of not having the chance to be able to recognize that and make sure whatever you might be dealing with, that you can put someone in your camp and that you know you can go to them at any time. I
Yeah.
think with self-care, just to sort of round off what we're talking about, Maryanne, is that I think with self-care, we can read an awful lot of books, we can see an awful lot of social media posts, and we have to be perfect and we have to compare ourselves to others. I would encourage you not to do that, but rather to follow the words of Leonard Cohen in his song Anthem. And the chorus, I'm not going to sing it, it's okay, is ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Might the self-care be open to where the cracks are and how you might find an approach, a tool, a strategy to let the light in so we can navigate and go and get on with the rest of our lives.
Wonderful. And when you think about that personal example that you just shared with Gordon, and it makes me think about situations where, it's yourself being in the conflict and perhaps not making that call to speak to a friend, but also the other way round, as you've just pointed out, Gordon saying, why didn't you call me? When we all think about the people that we might have in our network, whether it's family, friends, or professional network, would anyone ignore that call? As you say, we want to be the hero, to go it alone, to be able to manage it, to feel like we've achieved it ourselves. Or maybe we feel that everybody else is too busy to listen and they've got too much other stuff on their plate. But I'm thinking about what Gordon was feeling about by you not phoning him, thinking, not, we'd always answer the phone, wouldn't we? To have that
100%.
conversation.
And that's a live example, Maryanne, where I was closed down to that. And probably one of the reasons that I'm doing the work that I'm doing now
Mm.
is to make sure that, those connections that sometimes when we're in conflict, we can undervalue, underappreciate, or not recognize, or in my case, completely miss.
Yeah.
And the conversation that we're having might the work that you're doing in terms of the communication in, closely aligned with the process of mediation as we talked about in the previous episode. But I really feel that actually there's a sense of opportunity. There's a sense of possibility rather than it being definite, defined, and it's people before process.
Yeah. Yeah. Drew, this has been such a fascinating conversation. I've really enjoyed talking to you about conflict resolution. It's really opened my eyes to viewing it all through a completely different lens, actually. And I feel as if you've given us a really brilliant toolkit, not only in defining conflict or thinking about the steps to take, but this final piece on self-care. It's just gives wonderful practical tips for anyone to be able to then apply to day-to-day conflict they may be facing. So thank you so very much for your time and for sharing this with us.
Well, Maryanne, if I can say right back at you, I have really, really loved the experience of just being given time, quality time, to be able to share that which we're both kind of passionate and committed to. And if I can, in saying thank you, and to your listeners, a final quote from Václav Havel, who was president of Czechoslovakia, and it's hope above all, which gives us the strength to continually try new things. I hope by listening to this episode that you will have hope to have the strength to continually try new things. Go well, as I know you will. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew. This has been a fascinating conversation, Drew. I've learned so much and feel better equipped myself for handling conflict or what feels like a difficult conversation or situation. There are so many different aspects to consider. But thanks so much to Drew for his time. It's been fantastic to look at so many angles of this and learn so much in a short space of time with such practical takeaways for so many different scenarios. I've learned so much from these conversations with Drew. When you look up the meaning of the word conflict, we find definitions with words like struggle, clash, disagreement, dispute. And I think that is why, personally, as we all discovered in our first conversation, that I am an avoider. Because the word conflict has an edge to it, for me anyway. But now I'm viewing it in a very different light, as a feeling, something that we must recognize exists and learn skills around how to navigate it and not let it define us. If we can take Drew's 3 points about ensuring people are listened to, valued, and have a sense of belonging, and make them our compass for life, then I think we'd be doing really well. The first time I met Drew, we were delivering our own courses within a 2-day leadership program arranged by a client. Drew joined the workshop I ran on the first day, a communication skills session, as an attendee, and afterwards we had lengthy conversations about our work and how much it complements each other. The skills I talk about around communication are critical within resolving conflict. From preparing a structure of ideas on how the conversation might go, to allow you to then think on your feet, to the skills around maintaining a calm composure if you're feeling pressure, if emotions are running high or you're stressed. So it was a no-brainer to invite him onto this podcast and have this conversation. And I'm confident that this is a to-be continued conversation with Drew. We want to run another episode where we can answer your questions around resolving conflict. It would be amazing to run this a bit like a Q&A session between Drew and myself and really bring to life what's going on in your world, whether you're in conflict or you're mediating it. So send me your questions to mj@maryannejohnston.co.uk and we'll gather them up and plan another recording. So thanks again to Drew for his time and to you for listening to The Agile Speaker. If you want to learn more about Drew and his work, head to drummondinternational.com. And if you want to tap into our latest insights and resources and be the first to hear about new podcasts and courses, head to maryannejohnston.co.uk and sign up to our newsletter.